In this video, we combine some of the most terrifying cave diving disasters we've covered on this channel. If you enjoy these stories, make sure to leave a subscription for more exciting cave diving documentaries like these. For fishing enthusiasts in North Florida, Merritt's Mill Pond is a popular spot for catching red ear fish and largemouth bass. But even though this is what the area is best known for, most people don't realize there is something else hiding just beneath its serene surface. Caves. 7 diveable ones, in fact. In the late spring of 2020, North Florida residents who didn't know about these hidden caves soon found out about them, because something newsworthy happened in one of them, and it seemed to have come straight out of a nightmare. This is the terrifying story of Clyde Douglas Rorex and his mysterious death at Hole-in-the-Wall Cave. The event. Hole-in-the-Wall Cave is easy to miss if you're just casually floating around Merritt's Mill Pond and don't know what to look for. But tucked in a corner, amid trees and shrubbery, there is a very small dock. To many visitors, it probably seems like it's in the middle of nowhere and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But this is the spot. Just below this dock is an opening in the underwater backside of the pond. Difficult to see even if your boat is floating right above it. On June 9th, 2020, this is the same dock where experienced cave diver Clyde Douglas Rorex would have parked his boat and begun assembling his diving gear. Rorex was a North Florida local. He knew the area well and had been on similar cave dives many times before, including the one he was about to attempt solo. Rorex was prepared to dive in what is known as a side mount configuration, which many diving experts advocate as a safe and stable method. Since Rorex was diving alone, no one knows exactly when he first entered the water and made his initial descent into the cave. But alarm bells were soon raised when he failed to return at the expected time. The owner of a nearby dive shop called Cave Adventures was immediately notified. The dive shop owner's name was Ed Sorensen, and as luck would have it, he is one of the most revered cave rescue divers in the world. Ed is often called when someone, somewhere, goes missing in an underwater cave. That quiet day in early June was no different. Sorensen gathered his equipment, leapt into his truck, and drove out to Merritt's Mill Pond, unknowingly diving headfirst in what would turn out to be a tragedy that would prove difficult to explain. The recovery. The first thing Sorensen would have found when he approached Hole-in-the-Wall Cave was Clyde Douglas Rorex's boat, still tied up to the small dock with nobody in it. Finding space to maneuver his own boat around Rorex's and tie it up, Sorensen quickly put on his diving gear and entered the water. Unlike many other caves around the world, finding even the entrance to Hole-in-the-Wall Cave requires searching around underwater. Roughly 10 feet below the surface, near the dock, you'll find it. Initially, the cave is quite narrow, and shows no signs of being anything more than a small hole in the wall of the pond, hence the name. But, as experienced divers know, and Ed Sorensen knew as he made his way into the tunnel, everything inside changes after a few more yards. Sorensen first had to pass by an infamous warning sign, the likes of which are posted in numerous popular diving caves around the world. It features an image of the Grim Reaper and reminds divers, there is nothing in this cave worth dying for. Sorensen passed by this sign and swam further into the cave, risking his life so that he might save the life of another diver. Shortly after the Grim Reaper sign, Hole-in-the-Wall Cave suddenly changes from a shallow, narrow passageway into what looks at first like a big room. That is, until you look down. The room has no floor. It's what divers call a chimney. And the chimney in Hole-in-the-Wall Cave is a nearly straight 85-foot drop down to the cave floor. Having braved such conditions under such circumstances before, Sorensen would have been steeling his resolve in preparation to descend into the dark abyss and search for the missing diver. But, to his surprise, and the later perplexion of many, Sorensen entered the cave to find what he was looking for easily and quickly. The dead body of Clyde Douglas Rorex was floating not far from the entrance. The aftermath. Extracting Rorex's body from the cave proved a relatively simple task. Sadly, there was nothing Ed Sorensen or any other medical personnel could do. Rorex had died before anybody had arrived. The challenge instead became explaining what went wrong. When he was found, Rorex still had one of his diving regulators in his mouth. Both of the cylinders he was wearing were completely empty. An examination was done on all the equipment Rorex had been using that day, but strangely, nobody was able to find anything that wasn't working properly. Another valuable source of information was Rorex's computer. Rorex used his computer to plan out and keep records of his dives, and his dive at Hole in the Wall that day was no different. His computer records showed that his total dive time that day was supposed to be approximately 45 minutes. Based on the rate at which he typically consumes air, Rorex had accordingly brought enough gas to last as long as 90 minutes underwater. Clearly, this meant something had gone dramatically wrong with Rorex's plan. But what? Another piece of information Rorex's computer records provided was a profile of his actual dive. Looking at changes in depth, investigators were able to see when Rorex turned around and started swimming back the way he came. Conspicuously, there was an 11 to 12 minute period where Clyde Douglas Rorex stayed at the same depth. Then, immediately after this 11 to 12 minute period, Rorex turned around and tried to make his way back out of the cave. What was he doing for those 11 to 12 minutes? Was he just taking in the scenery before heading back? Or did something more sinister take place? Since nobody could find any faults with Rorex's equipment that day, the best explanation Ed Sorensen could work out was that Rorex had maybe gotten stuck or tangled in his line, or something to that effect, and in wrestling to free himself, he used up a bunch of his extra air. Sorensen speculated that if this entrapment theory were true, he would be able to find evidence of it if he ventured back into the cave the next day. Specifically, he believed there would be major slit disturbances in the area where Rorex got stuck. Hole-in-the-Wall Cave does not have a strong water flow inside it, and there aren't a huge number of places where a diver is likely to get stuck. The silt would still be lingering, and there would be evidence on the cave floor as well. This might lead to further evidence that would explain just what happened to Clyde Douglas Rorex. Sorensen dove back into the cave the following day, this time hunting for clues. Knowing the cave well, he focused on all the major areas where a diver might get trapped. But after nearly running out of his own air supply, conducting a thorough search up and down, Sorensen was unable to find any silt disturbances. In fact, he was unable to find any evidence of a struggle at all. Clyde Douglas Rorex's unexpected death was ruled an accidental drowning. But beyond that, it remains a mystery. How did such an experienced diver with proper working equipment and prior knowledge of the cave meet his demise? Why did he run out of oxygen when he brought roughly twice the amount he expected he would need? And what exactly was he doing for those last 11 to 12 minutes before turning around and trying unsuccessfully to make it out of the cave alive? Why wasn't any evidence of a struggle left behind? Of all the outdoor accidents we've covered on this channel, this is one of the more difficult ones to explain. Rorex's story, like the Grim Reaper sign at the entrance, is a reminder that nobody is immune to freak accidents. He seemingly did everything right, from preparation to training to equipment. But still, something went horribly wrong that even the leading diving experts afterward couldn't really find a complete explanation for.
The Lost River Cave sounds like a place from an Indiana Jones movie. It also looks like one. Let's face it, there aren't a whole lot of caves on this planet that you can explore on a boat, or that have been featured in Ripley's Believe It or Not. It's a unique place, great for families to visit, but it also boasts a dramatic history and, on rare occasions, has even turned deadly. The Cave. Lost River Cave is located in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Bowling Green is the third largest city in Kentucky, but the nearest big city to it is actually Nashville, Tennessee. Since Bowling Green sits quite close to Kentucky's southern border, aside from this cave, The biggest thing Bowling Green is probably known for is for the National Corvette Museum. It's not really a place that draws millions of visitors every tourist season. The existence of Lost River Cave within its city limits is something of an anomaly. Most cities don't get to have such an unusual natural landmark just a few minutes away from the local shopping mall. The entrance to the Lost River Cave, which is literally across the street from a Popeye's chicken restaurant, is among the largest cave entrances in the eastern United States. The cave itself is really a cave system, which stretches out for 7 miles underground. As the name suggests, the cave has a fairly wide river running through it. For a long time, the river was also thought to be insanely deep. When geologists first began trying to measure the depth of the water, they used something called a plumb bob, a small pointed weight on the end of a string. Although I haven't read any direct accounts of this, there's a good chance that the first time they tried it, they ran out of string. They didn't just need a few feet of it, or even just a few dozen feet of it. To their surprise, geologists ended up needing hundreds of feet of string to measure the depth of the Lost River. After some adjustments to their string supply, they finally managed to get the plumb bob to hit what they thought was the bottom of the river, at an astonishing 437 feet below the surface. They were measuring at a section called the Blue Hole. Blue holes are essentially sinkholes, and they appear in other places around the world, such as the Bahamas and the South China Sea. The fact that there was a blue hole inside a cave in the middle of the U.S. that appeared to be nearly 450 feet deep helped catapult Lost River Cave to international fame. In fact, this extraordinary depth was the main reason why Lost River Cave ended up being in Ripley's Believe It or Not. But, disappointingly, readers should have chosen not to believe this one. It was later discovered that these insane measurements were wildly inaccurate, but they were wildly inaccurate for an interesting reason. The Blue Hole in Lost River Cave actually connects to another river, one that runs underground. So technically, the Blue Hole is only 16 feet deep. The plumb bob was just getting swept underground, making it seem like it kept descending and descending. This was a clever trick by Lost River Cave. No one seemed to figure it out until long after it had become a famous tourist destination, and many are still on the fence about the true depth. This apparently includes the government of Kentucky, whose Energy and Environment Cabinet still says on its website that the Blue Hole's depth is supposedly 437 feet. No matter how deep it is, the Blue Hole is still an amazing feature of the cave, and it's not the only reason the cave is an amazing place to visit. Today, on a boat, it takes roughly a half hour to tour the whole cave, because that's how much there is to see and explore inside. The cave also has a fascinating history to learn about. People were storing food and using the cave for shelter as long as 10,000 years ago. Around the turn of the 19th century, a watermill was built here, and for a long time, it was the only underground watermill in the United States. During the Civil War, Bowling Green was Kentucky's provisional capital as part of the Confederacy. During the Union Army takeover, Union soldiers used the cave as a camp, as many as 40,000 of them. According to local archaeologists, you can still see the names of Union soldiers carved into the walls. My favorite part of the Lost Cave story is what happened during Prohibition. According to local legend, although this has never been proven, the cave was used by bootleggers to make alcohol illegally. After Prohibition, and this part we know for sure, the cave was turned into a nightclub. Yeah, no joke, a nightclub. The club hosted a number of famous musical acts, including the NBC Orchestra. Billboard described it as the only air-conditioned nightclub at the time because it was so naturally cool inside. For reasons that could only have to do with the general public being no fun, the club went out of style and closed in the 1960s. The cave went into a period of decline, filling with trash. It wasn't until the 1990s that an effort was made to refurbish the cave and open it for tourism. The event. Paying to take a boat tour is generally the way most people experience Lost River Cave today. However, there are those who try and explore the cave alone. You're not supposed to do this. The property is privately owned, and you have to avoid getting caught just to get inside. Despite the obvious intrigue, I of course cannot recommend that anybody try this. Not only is it dangerous, it's also illegal. But I can tell you the story of what happened when one man tried to do it. His name was Danny L. Vaughn Jr. Danny grew up in Warren County, the same county where Bowling Green is. He was born in 1990 and spent 30 years of his life living near Lost River Cave before he seemingly decided enough was enough. He was going to try and explore the cave. I say this in speculation. As far as I've been able to uncover, nobody really knows for sure what Danny's motivation was. Danny reached the age of 30 during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Stores were closed. Families were forced to stay home. Needless to say, tours of Lost River Cave were canceled indefinitely, and there was no way, at least no legal way, to get in. Danny had a daughter. He also had a decent-sized family full of siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and cousins. There's no real way to know, but I think we can safely assume Danny's experience of COVID-19 was much like it was for most people: stressful, tragic, highly disruptive, and after a while, full of boredom and restlessness. I guarantee you Danny L. Vaughn Jr. is not the only person in Warren County who thought about sneaking into Lost River Cave during lockdown. What sets Danny apart is that it appears he went out and actually tried to do it. As I described earlier, one of the many things that makes Lost River Cave unique is its central location. As a matter of fact, it is right off the side of the highway. This poses both advantages and disadvantages for sneaking in. For a massive cave with a 7-mile river inside it, the place is remarkably easy to get into. You could even stop across the highway at Lost River Liquors and grab some beer on your way in. Being right next to the highway is also pretty ideal for making a quick getaway if needed. At the same time, being in such a central location means there are people around most of the time. Of course, due to COVID, there were no tours happening and the cave itself was empty, but the whole surrounding area wasn't. Danny may have planned meticulously for this, or he may have had no plan at all. None of us really have any idea. All we know is that there was at least one witness to the event. At around 6:30 p.m. on March 11, 2020, Danny L. Vaughn Jr. was seen climbing over the fence and entering Lost River Cave. The witness who saw him called the police immediately. Why they were so quick to call the authorities must have one of two explanations. The first is that the person called because they saw Danny fall into the water. This would explain why they were so quick to dial 911. They thought he had an accident and was probably hurt. The second explanation is that the person who called was simply calling because he was trespassing and they wanted to report it. This begs the question of whether Danny fell or not. Frustratingly, local news reports seem to conflict on this. The local NBC station reported that officials on the scene said Danny jumped over the fence and fell into the river. But the local ABC station quoted an officer named Tim Gray who said, "We don't know if the individual jumped or fell from the fence, but we are aware of witnesses who did see him climb over the fence and did not see him resurface." Well, which is it? I've never been to Lost River Cave, but based on the multitude of photographs and video footage available online, I have not seen anything I would describe as a fence. There are certain sections inside the cave where there are railings, low metal beams along the river's edge, but there doesn't appear to be a fence that a witness from outside the cave could see Danny climbing over. But in May 2020, there might have been a temporary fence blocking entry to the cave, which has been shut down due to COVID just a month earlier. If I had to guess, that's probably what Danny climbed over and what the witness reported to the police. If that's true, it means Danny most likely didn't fall. He was just obviously sneaking in. What Danny got up to while he was in there is something we'll never know. The sad and mysterious ending to the story is that he somehow drowned in the river. If you frame the story like it was a madman who leapt over the fence, fell, and drowned, well, then it doesn't sound so peculiar. But if you dig a little deeper, as I think you and I have, we see that it probably wasn't that simple. Final thoughts. Danny probably didn't fall, and if he had fallen, he wouldn't have landed in the water, because he was probably climbing over a temporary fence that was blocking the opening of the cave, which is a bit of a distance from where the river actually sits. But how did Danny drown? Most of the river is only 4 or 5 feet deep. Sure, it's supposedly possible to drown in an inch of water, but if you're a full-grown male with enough physical agility to leap over a fence, how likely is that? Sadly, like so many cases, with this, we simply don't have enough information. It's possible no one does. Besides the witness who called the police, and according to Officer Gray, only saw him until he passed over the fence. No one saw Danny again until his body was recovered from the water. Was he a thrill seeker looking for an escape amid the stress and confinement imposed by COVID restrictions? Was he suffering a nervous breakdown? Did he somehow fall or hurt himself in the water in such a way that he couldn't swim or even stand up in the shallow river? Or did something else happen?
Along a remote stretch of coastline, more than 100 miles away from the capital city of Santo Domingo, El Dudu Lagoon is one of the finest natural attractions in the Dominican Republic. Visitors can enjoy swimming in freshwater, leaping off rocks, and even zooming across a zip line that covers the lagoon. But El Dudu is more than just an easygoing outdoor attraction. If you happen to dunk your head under the water, you'll see that the lagoon goes as deep as 66 feet. Not only that, but in its depths, the lagoon also hides a network of caves. Speleologists travel far and wide to this corner of the island so they can explore these daunting subterranean labyrinths. Sometimes, this ends in disaster. In February of 2019, the world got a startling glimpse of just how disastrous that can be, when two experienced divers from Italy dove confidently into the darkness beneath El Dudu Lagoon and never returned. In this video, we'll explore the horrifying demise of two divers, Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri, and study first-hand accounts from the rescue team to try and work out what really happened on that fateful day deep below the lush forest floor of the Dominican Republic. The event. On February 9th, 2019, at around 11:45 a.m., 57-year-old Carlos Barbieri and 44-year-old Carlos Basso entered the cave system beneath the waters of El Dudu Lagoon. Both were diving enthusiasts visiting from Italy. Despite having earned a reputation for doing dangerous cave dives around the world, neither man was diving certified. Ed Sorensen, who ended up working on their rescue mission, recalls hearing that an instructor in Italy had recently told Carlos Basso that he should consider getting proper training, to which Basso allegedly replied, quote, "There is nothing you could teach me that I don't already know." Now, whether Basso actually said this or not, it seems likely that it represents both his and Barbieri's attitudes. Without the proper certification, training, or all the necessary gear, both men plunged into the caves beneath El Dudu Lagoon, brimming with confidence from all their past successes. The underwater world which awaited them was something to behold. After descending deep into the lagoon itself, the pair would have eventually reached the mouth of the cave system. After navigating through some narrow passageways, and right past a highly conspicuous warning sign, the cave system begins to open up. A huge tunnel full of pillars, stalagmites, and stalactites winds even further and further into the bowels of the earth. Further on, the two reached a room in which there is actually an air pocket. Divers can swim up and emerge from the surface of the water to breathe fresh air, despite being located far below the surface of the lagoon where the journey began. The cave system winds and descends much, much further than this. Ambitious divers, which Basso and Barbieri both certainly were, can swim for a total of 45 minutes before finally reaching the end of the cave system. Much of the rest of the journey is significantly narrower and more cramped than the beginning. Unusually, the end of the line in El Dudu actually leads up to an alternative exit different from the place you entered. Called Cueva de Lili, divers exiting the cave via this route can expect to see bats, tarantulas, scorpions, and snakes. But whether they had planned on braving the creepy critters or not, Carlos Barbieri and Carlos Basso never made it there. The search. By mid-afternoon, the pair had still not re-emerged from the water. That's when word traveled to Philip Lehman. Lehman is the vice president of the Dominican Republic Speleological Society, or DRSS. Concerned, Lehman enlisted the help of a colleague named Angel Compres, and together the pair traveled to El Dudu. At the time, neither Lehman nor Compres knew what part of the cave system to look in. All they knew was that two divers were inside somewhere, and they were probably in trouble. This was a daunting task, given how vast El Dudu is. The first thing Lehman and Compres noticed upon entering the water was that a lot of silt had been stirred up. These fine particles can reduce visibility in underwater spaces to such a degree that it can be literally impossible to see anything in certain areas. This was obviously a hamper to their search, but it was also a clue. Silt can often be a factor or even a direct cause of many diving accidents. Working on this hunch, the pair were soon joined by El Dudu management and the local authorities from Cabrera, the town El Dudu was located in. The search team cleverly used the silt as a guide, figuring where there was more silt, there was probably a higher chance of the two divers. By following this trail of stirred-up silt, they eventually found a narrow passageway with very low visibility. Here, the search team found a broken guideline. This was a telltale sign that a serious accident had taken place. Unfortunately, using the silt as a map to the diver's location was a double-edged sword. Even though it led them to their first major clue, the visibility was so bad that they soon had to temporarily call off the search. The next day, the search team tried again, but visibility remained terrible and nothing was found. This continued for several days, with still no sign of either Carlos Barbieri or Carlos Basso. Then, finally, days after Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri had gone missing, the team made their first gruesome discovery. The body of 57-year-old Carlos Barbieri was found in a side passage. He was caught, and caught so badly that even though they'd found him, the team was unable to recover his body at the time. According to the National Speleological Society, this side passage is very narrow and is usually only attempted by divers using side mount gear. Barbieri didn't bring side mount gear. Following the discovery of Carlos Barbieri, more than a week went by with virtually no progress. At this point, they decided it was time to call in additional help. That's when Mike Young and internationally renowned rescue diver Ed Sorensen were called out to the Dominican Republic. The rescue. The heroic arrival of experts Ed Sorensen and Mike Young were interrupted in transit by an unexpected setback. Upon arriving at the border of the Dominican Republic, local authorities told the two men they weren't allowed into the country. This, while Carlos Barbieri's body remained lodged in the side passage, and Carlos Basso remained missing in the depths of the El Dudu cave system. In a report later published by the National Speleological Society, the reason for this is sort of strange. Apparently, the government was not only aware of the diving accident, but aware of the fact that the rescue mission was ongoing, and had been for well over a week. But they were wary of letting two American rescue divers in to help, because they assumed if it had taken this long already, the operation must have been way too dangerous. After some hasty negotiations, and maybe showing the local authorities his track record, Ed Sorensen and his partner Mike Young were allowed into the Dominican Republic. However, they were allowed in on one condition. They only had 8 days to recover both bodies. After 8 days, the authorities would call off the search for good. Recounting the story later, Sorensen describes how he brought special harnesses with which to extract the bodies. These harnesses were designed to wrap around at numerous different points on the body, for the horrific reason that, after being trapped and submerged for so many days, they may not come out in one piece. Due to the silt and the labyrinth-like nature of the cave system, Sorensen describes how he explored the cave. He held onto his guideline with one hand and held his other hand out in front of him, essentially feeling around for things that weren't made out of sand, water, or rock. He says he found the still-trapped body of Carlos Barbieri by literally bumping into him. Sorensen couldn't extract the body on his own, so he sent for the local crew to bring down a bunch of milk crates full of weights. These weights helped pull Barbieri's body down just enough to maneuver it out from under the section of the passage he was stuck in. Finally, after about 4 hours of grueling work, the deceased Barbieri had been recovered. But even now, nobody knew where the body of the younger Carlos Basso was. The day after the exhausting recovery of Carlos Barbieri, Ed Sorensen and Mike Young headed back into the cave. They continued their search in the same area, venturing slowly deeper into the very furthest depths of El Dudu. Sorensen actually reached a wall at the very back of the passageway before he found the body of Carlos Basso. Basso was down in a crevice. In order to reach him, Sorensen had to let go of the guideline. He held on to Mike Young, who held on to the guideline for both of them, while he worked with one hand to try and recover the body of Carlos Basso. Unlike the first body, this time Sorensen was able to extract the body without additional help. However, due to the extreme depths at which the body was found, the whole recovery again took approximately 4 hours. The aftermath. Even though there are some clear red flags in their story, to this day, authorities still don't know conclusively what went wrong with Carlos Barbieri and Carlos Basso. Overconfidence, and the fact that both men lacked proper training and proper equipment surely played a role, but the specific events that transpired to lead to their grisly demise remain the subjects of speculation. The report of the incident done by the National Speleological Society speculates that as they were nearing the end of their air supply, one of the men, either Basso or Barbieri, got tangled in the line and broke it, making them unable to find their way out. Another theory put forward is that they mistakenly began following a jump line, a different line left behind by other divers thinking it was their own. Either way, the report stresses that neither Basso nor Barbieri should have been in El Dudu in the first place, especially so deep. Not only did their lack of certification and equipment result in their own deaths, but it also left their bodies in an insane situation that put the lives of the rescue workers at risk as well. In the end, like other tragic tales of divers meeting their demise, Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri serve today as a cautionary tale for divers of all experience levels to never overestimate their abilities. As the saying goes, the wolf is always at the door.
If someone invited you to visit a place called Gollum's Cave, would you go? What if they told you it was also sometimes referred to by locals as the Cave of Death? This sounds like something from a fantasy novel, but it is in fact real. In Provo, Utah, directly east of Brigham Young University, there is a large mountain with the letter Y inscribed on the side. This signifies the name of the university. This scenic mountain, which is creatively called Y Mountain, may look tranquil, but it hides a dark and haunting secret. The cave known as Gollum's Cave presents itself as a large opening in the side of Y Mountain. Those who make the daring venture into it soon find that it is a long, descending tunnel. The tunnel lowers you deeper and deeper below the surface of the mountain until, some 90 feet later, it drops you off in a large pool of water. The pool is roughly 6 feet deep and 15 feet across, which is strikingly similar to the kind of pool you might find at a rec center. The only difference is it's located inside Y Mountain. The reason for its existence is that Gollum's Cave is actually a cave that intersects with an old abandoned mine. The appeal of such a remarkable place just off campus is obvious, especially for young college students. However, it is also a remarkably dangerous place, as this shocking story will show. Our story takes us back in time a bit, to when YouTube was still a brand new website most people hadn't heard of yet. In the year 2005, CPL Productions released a new movie in the UK called The Descent. It tells the story of a group of friends who decide to explore a cave in the remote wilderness of North Carolina. The group gets trapped inside the underground labyrinth of caves and has to contend with crawlers, vicious and bloodthirsty creatures described by at least one movie critic as being similar to Gollum from Lord of the Rings. The movie went on to be a major success, both commercially and critically. It made almost $60 million at the box office and received tons of praise from film critics who seemed to agree that it was a fresh and engaging concept. Today, the movie is often ranked on lists of the best horror movies, and more significantly, it is seen as having pioneered a new genre of horror that has since been frequently imitated, but never quite matched. Writer and director Neil Marshall tapped into something that seems to both captivate and terrify the human imagination. There's something about climbing down deeper and deeper into a cave with no knowledge of how far it goes or what is hiding down inside it that is hard to look away from. The Descent first debuted in UK theaters on July 8, 2005. The timing of this is extraordinary. Just 1 month later, in Provo, Utah, something would happen in real life that followed the plot line of the movie quite closely. The cast of characters for this story was 24-year-old Blake Donner, 21-year-old Jennifer Galbraith, 18-year-old Ariel Singer, and 28-year-old Scott McDonald. It is very unlikely that any of these young men and women have ever heard of the movie The Descent because it didn't come out in the United States until 2006, the following year. That makes their story even more strange because they clearly weren't inspired by the movie to try and replicate it. It's simply by tragic coincidence that these 4 people decided one day in August that they wanted to wander down into a dark, mysterious cave together. And since they were all residents of Utah County, they were close to such a place and had probably heard rumors about it for years. Unlike some other, more professionally explored caves, Gollum's Cave doesn't show up on a map. You can certainly find Y Mountain hugging right up against the edge of Provo's urban sprawl, but good luck using Google to figure out where it is. Back in 2005, it seems inevitable that the 4 would have had to have known where the cave was through word of mouth or by someone in the group having already been there before. Sources say that the location of the cave has always been a closely guarded secret. However, a blogger named Israel Niederhauser, who once explored the cave and lived to tell the tale, says that the hike to get there is several hours long, including 1 to 2 hours of hiking without any trail. Niederhauser had to figure out the location himself by scouring old news articles, combing over maps, and even speaking with a local who claimed that a Navajo medicine man told him there was gold buried inside a cave with water running through it. How Blake, Jennifer, Ariel, and Scott knew where to find the cave is something we'll never know definitively, but chances are really high that it wasn't everyone's first time visiting. It may, however, have been the first time they all decided to try and travel, all the way down. On the evening of Wednesday, August 17, 2005, 5 friends were having dinner together in Provo, Utah. They were the 4 people I mentioned earlier, plus another friend named Steve Hundley. As usual with a group of close friends, conversation was lively, and at some point the dinner wore on. Someone at the table asked the group if they had ever heard about the Cave of Death. Presumably, the answer was no, because whoever brought it up then went on to describe the cave. It's very unlikely that whoever brought it up had been to the cave before, and was probably the only one in the group who had. It might be helpful if we could know who it was, but sadly, we don't know for sure. However, at least one source suggests that it was one of the 2 women. Whoever it was, they did a good job of making the Cave of Death sound appealing, because the group was soon convinced that tonight was the night to try and explore it. Well, that is, everyone except for Steve Hundley. Apparently, Steve had also been to the cave before, in fact somewhat recently, and despite the enthusiasm around him, he didn't feel comfortable going back. After dinner, Steve separated from the group, and the remaining 4 invited another friend named Joseph Ferguson. Why they were so intent on having 5 people is anybody's guess. Maybe they thought it would be safer with that number. Even though that seems like the most likely explanation, one thing we can be sure of is that the journey this group of 5 proceeded to embark on was anything but safe. Remember, the hike to reach this remote cave is at least several hours long, and the group had just finished eating dinner. It was probably dark outside before they even left. Provo is usually pretty warm in the summertime, and that night it wasn't raining, so they wouldn't have had to worry about the weather too much. However, they did have to contend with hiking in extreme darkness. Once you move out of Provo and around the side of Y Mountain, you move from the familiar glow of a populous urban area to the vast shadows of total wilderness. The area behind Y Mountain appears to be one of the least populated in the country. There are barely any roads, let alone towns, and if you travel on foot, you won't reach a major highway until you cross Route 40 some 20 miles away. Provo is 4,500 feet above sea level, and the top of Y Mountain is 4,000 feet higher than that. So on a clear night, the light from the stars might be brighter than most would expect. But still, in such a rural area, the group would certainly have needed flashlights. And even then, it would have been an artist's task to find their way all the way back to where Gollum's Cave, or the Cave of Death, lay waiting for them. Somehow, they made it. By the time the group reached the mouth of the cave, it was 2 or 3 in the morning. It was at this point that Joseph Ferguson, the fifth friend who they invited after dinner, decided he'd rather not go inside. There appear to be some conflicting reports about this. It's possible that he initially went into the cave, but then turned around at some point. Either way, what we know for sure is that Joseph ended up waiting outside while the other four, Blake, Jennifer, Ariel, and Scott, descended. At this point, we have to rely on Joseph's testimony of what happened. He claims that after about 45 minutes, he started to get worried. He says he called some friends who he knew were familiar with this cave and asked for advice. Their advice appears to have been to call the police, so that's what Joseph did. Something odd about this is the fact that Joseph, in 2005, apparently had cell reception at the location. It is also somewhat miraculous that authorities were able to figure out where he was, given that it was in the middle of the forest and way off any trail. But luckily, they were, and they started the rescue operation immediately. The crew used pumps to send air into the cave and to remove some of the water from the pool at the bottom. After some time spent doing this, they were able to see all four bodies, dead, floating, and facing the same direction. All four were at the opposite end of the pool, facing the entrance. This haunting image poses many questions, which we'll get to in a moment, but at the time of the discovery, all anybody could think about was the indescribable horror of this discovery. Four young friends had all died shocking deaths right next to each other at the same time. News of the tragedy spread quickly all across Utah as dawn broke over Y Mountain. Almost immediately, city officials ruled to have the cave sealed off to prevent anyone else from meeting a similar fate. Today, there is a sign at the location to commemorate Brian, Scott, Ariel, and Jennifer. This is one of the most devastating cave accidents in modern U.S. history. What makes it even more troubling is that we have even less information than normal when it comes to explaining what happened. Unsurprisingly, the Utah County coroner ruled all deaths as accidental drownings. But why did they drown? As I mentioned earlier, the pool at the bottom of Gollum's cave is roughly 6 feet deep. This sounds virtually harmless until you take into account that this is also roughly the height of the chamber the water sits in. Depending on the water level, there might be only a little bit of headroom just below the cave ceiling, or there might be none at all. On the other side of the pool is another opening, which is really just a small room that can fit about 6 to 8 people maximum. There is also supposedly a rope inside the pool to help visitors travel across the pool. You might have to cross the pool underwater, but with the help of a guide rope and a distance of only 15 feet or so, this doesn't seem like something that could easily kill 4 young, healthy people, especially considering that the autopsy found no drugs or alcohol in any of their systems. And that's before you take into account the bizarre formation in which the group was apparently found. Not only did they all drown, but they were all found floating at the far end of the pool, facing the entrance. That is, as far as I can work out, the least likely formation for them to be in. And it's not like there was a current that could have pushed them all the way back there. They had to have died that way, and neither I nor anyone else I've been able to find have had any explanation for that. What is striking about this story is that, based on the context, most people probably don't wonder what happened. After all, it was a remote location nicknamed the Cave of Death. 4 people climbed down into it in the middle of the night and drowned at the bottom. Where's the mystery in that? Except it's actually very mysterious when you start looking at the specific details. Sadly, we'll never know the answers because the only people who were down in the cave when the tragedy took place were the victims themselves. If nothing else, the tragic tale of Gollum's Cave highlights the fact that cave exploration can be wildly unpredictable. To 4 young people in relatively good physical condition, a 90-foot descent, a shallow swim of 20 feet, and a small underground chamber sounded like navigable conditions. But due to some form of bad luck or another, something happened that the group wasn't expecting, and they paid the highest price for it.
On this channel, we've covered some of the most harrowing tales from some of the most intimidating dive sites around the world. Now, some of you viewers may have wondered, which is the deadliest? Is there one diving location that's more dangerous, more terrifying, more unbelievable than all the rest? The answer is yes. There is one particular dive site with more fatalities to its name than any other. More astonishing than that, no one knows for sure exactly why. Over the years, this mysterious and lethal site has witnessed some very newsworthy accidents, including the deaths of famous divers. But while the international community may be familiar with some of these isolated, high-profile stories, the locals, especially the local rescue teams, are desperate to alert the public about the larger picture. This is the larger picture. This is the incredible history and enduring mystery of Egypt's Blue Hole. To visit the deadliest dive site in the world, you have to travel to a remote region of Egypt on the country's southeastern coast. Even today, there are still only a few major roads that will take you all the way out there, and only one small airport. Along the way, for hundreds of miles, you will see almost nothing but desert. In a country with more than 100 million people living in it, this entire 23,000 square mile region only has about 600,000 of them. If you choose to drive from Cairo, it'll take you about 6.5 hours, but if you do, eventually you'll reach the small coastal town of Dahab. Historically, the first people to arrive here were the Bedouins, Arabic-speaking nomadic people who have long lived in the deserts of the Middle East. With the dramatic Sinai Mountains perched behind them and the calm waters of the Red Sea at their feet, Dahab once served as an idyllic fishing village for generations of Bedouins. However, had these Bedouins been able to fly drones or board helicopters many generations ago, they would have almost immediately noticed something very unusual about their beloved fishing town. It has a hole in it. The jagged, rocky slopes of the Sinai Mountains descend partway below the surface of the Red Sea, but then jut back inward dramatically at one specific point in the coastline. It is at this particular point where, underneath the water, a massive depression sits in the flesh of the earth. Early Bedouins can certainly be forgiven for not knowing the full extent of what was hidden just beneath them. After all, the depression is an example of a strange geological phenomena that nobody fully recognized until at least the latter half of the 20th century. It is, in fact, a submarine sinkhole. It wasn't until recent decades that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration began working alongside recreational divers and fishermen who had been saying for years that they were finding huge underwater sinkholes in various parts of the world. Even today, the NOAA, or NOAA, is still unraveling the mystery of what the Blue Hole and other sinkholes like it actually are, or how they come to exist. Their current theory is that they are similar to sinkholes on land, but they're simply located underwater. The organization admits that much is still to be learned. It is still completely unknown how many of these submarine sinkholes exist, or where they may be located around the world. The full extent of the submarine sinkhole off the coast of Dahab wasn't widely known until the late 1960s. That's because in June of 1967, war broke out between Israel and the Arab countries of Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. The war was remarkably short, known to historians today as the Six-Day War. But in that short time, Israel managed to capture a swath of territory, including the Sinai Peninsula, and also uncover what many today consider the most beautiful and enchanting dive site on Earth. The Israeli occupation of the Sinai Peninsula would last for another 15 years. In 1982, the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty was officially implemented, and Egypt finally established diplomatic relations with Israel. During the 15-year military occupation, however, the submarine sinkhole off the coast of Dahab was explored by Israeli dive teams. Right away, for the first time, the world finally awakened to the extraordinary diving location that the Blue Hole of Dahab truly is. So what makes it so extraordinary? Well, for starters, unlike many dive sites, the Blue Hole is easily accessible right from the beach. You need only wade out a few meters into the water, and you're there, close enough to remain in earshot of the people still sunning on the shore. Knee-deep in calm water, take just one step forward, and it's a 400-plus foot drop. However, this is not the way divers actually do it. The proper way to enter is from the opposite side. The entrance to the blue hole is up the coastline, about 200 meters away. The next thing that makes the blue hole so unique is what you find once you enter. What looks initially like an unassuming drop-off into shallow water becomes, after just a few feet of swimming, an open void. It doesn't matter how clean or clear your diving goggles are, you cannot see the bottom. The beginning of the diving route takes you along what is best described as an underwater canyon. Huge rocky walls surround you on either side. Below, the walls descend deeper and deeper, eventually vanishing into the blue nothingness underneath. This wide avenue leads the way forward. The bottom remains so far below as to be completely out of sight the entire time. The height is actually so intense that it's common for divers to get vertigo. Floating in space, hundreds of feet above a perilous drop, the human body and mind have only one natural instinct in this situation. Yet, for those who can withstand the gut-wrenching environment, it can be the thrill of a lifetime. But the most astonishing part of this one-of-a-kind dive site is still to come. Eventually, as intrepid divers swim their way further and further, they see, growing in the distance, something that seems almost too mystical to be real. A bluish glow, as if there is a faint light source sitting at the bottom of the ocean. As you get closer, the bluish glow soon becomes undeniable. It grows larger and brighter until it dominates your field of vision. What this supernatural entity really turns out to be is a massive archway leading into the blue hole itself. From up at the surface, almost like the pupil of some massive eye looking out towards the sun, daylight pours down through the thin layer of seawater and floods down through the chasm of the blue hole. Recreational divers who have swum this far have already been flirting with the limit of what is considered a safe depth. Now, perhaps more than 100 feet below the surface, they must contend with the fact that this glowing archway is still way, way below them. Those who have seen the archway in person all share the belief that there is something almost magically alluring about it. Upon his visit to the site, the excellent diver and TV presenter Monty Halls noted that when you first come upon it, the archway looks easy to pass through, as if the open chamber of the blue hole is inches away on the other side. In reality, the archway is nearly 100 feet across. The blue light is so intense that it shines out across even that long distance, creating the illusion that it is much shorter than it really is. After descending to a depth of over 400 feet and passing through this incredible archway, divers rise through the glowing vertical tunnel and emerge back into daylight at the main opening of the blue hole. The entire dive, from start to finish, carries you a mere 250 meters along the shoreline. Now, while undeniably one of the most uniquely beautiful sights in the world, it is also unusually simple and straightforward. In fact, some in the technical diving community have made the claim that the blue hole should be one of the safest dive sites in the world. But it isn't. The rocky outcroppings near the entrance are littered with signs. Little makeshift tombstones with name after name after name after name. In fact, the total death count is unconfirmed, but ask a local Bedouin diver named Tariq Omar, who has been conducting body recoveries at the blue hole for decades, and he'll tell you that well over 100 people have died in the blue hole. Some divers familiar with the area even estimate as many as 200. This means the blue hole is by far the most lethal diving site on Earth. No cursed Mexican cenote nor dizzying Florida sinkhole even comes close to the rate of death that this wide, straight 250-meter stretch of Egyptian coastline somehow has. In fact, based on records kept by the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery, the entire state of Florida, arguably the mecca of extreme underwater diving sites, has roughly the same yearly death toll as the blue hole on its own. Imagine one small stretch of highway out in the middle of nowhere causing as many accidents as every Formula One racetrack combined. Or imagine one small town restaurant where more people get sick than every restaurant in a nearby city combined. Clearly, something out of the ordinary has to be going on. There is something freakish beneath the surface of the blue hole of Denab, and it's killing divers of all skill levels at a rate that is beyond abnormal. So, what is it? The people of Dahab have a local legend to explain the sensational killing capacity of the site. The legend states that long ago, there was a young woman who lived on the coast of Dahab named Shaheen. Shaheen had fallen in love with a local boy, but their love was forbidden by their parents. Against her will, Shaheen was engaged to be married to another man, a man who she didn't love. Way back then, the opening to the blue hole was not yet submerged by the sea. In despair, the young Shaheen threw herself over the edge, falling to her death. According to local legend, the blue hole is now haunted by Shaheen's restless spirit. With the enticing glow of the archway hundreds of feet below, the broken-hearted Shaheen lures young men to her, hypnotizing them before taking their souls into the next world. It's a stirring fable, and perhaps one that has more than a hint of truth behind it. But surely there has to be more to it than that. Well, as we're about to see, the history of deaths at this site is nothing short of unbelievable. So, without further ado, let's take a closer look at some of the people who have met their doom in the blue hole. Perhaps their stories can help shed some light on the true nature of this mind-bending phenomena. In November of 1997, two experienced divers from Ireland were in Dahab diving with the Paddy Diving School. They were 22-year-old Martin Guerra and 23-year-old Conor O'Regan. According to a report by the Irish Times, O'Regan had previous experience not only diving, but specifically with diving in the Red Sea. His fellow diver Guerra was a diving instructor who had been living in Egypt for the past year. On Wednesday, November 19, 1997, local diver Tarek Omar got the call he had been fearing he would get ever since he started working as an instructor in the area 2 years prior. Martin Guerra and Conor O'Regan had entered the blue hole together and had failed to resurface. Steeling his resolve, Omar dove into the blue hole to look for the missing pair. What he ended up finding would leave a permanent mark on his memory. The two Irishmen were resting in a ditch about 335 feet below the surface. Both had drowned, and yet their bodies remained locked in a haunting embrace, almost two corpses dancing. Omar later speculated that one had been sinking and the other had been trying to pull them back up when the pair both eventually drowned. But which of the pair had first begun sinking, and why? Their names are among the many that line the rock wall near the entrance, ensuring that even today, their tragic deaths will at the very least be remembered. But understood or explained? Not so much. Nearly a decade earlier, before Tarek Omar had moved to Dahab and earned himself the nickname Bone Collector, another pair of divers had met a similar fate. Daniel Malak and Tarek El-Khadi both drowned in the blue hole on the same day in 1988. Tarek Omar had very little time to dwell on the past, however. Within a couple of years of his first grisly recovery mission, he found himself at the forefront of what would become the blue hole's most famous death. In April of the year 2000, 22-year-old Russian-Israeli diving instructor Yuri Lipsky had been itching to dive the blue hole for at least a year prior. On that fateful day, witnesses say they saw Lipsky entering the water off the coast of Dahab with two very important things missing: a diving buddy and an extra oxygen tank. Lipsky's motivations for diving alone and with only one oxygen tank remain controversial to this day. But amazingly, one thing we do know he had with him that day was a video camera. The last anybody saw him alive, Lipsky was walking up the coast in his diving gear. When he failed to resurface, word spread quickly. Within a day, Lipsky's father had traveled from Russia to Dahab to look for his son. The man was reportedly all but ready to dive into the hole himself and had to be talked out of it by locals. Once again, the task of searching the blue hole fell to Tarek Omar. The search for Yuri Lipsky was unusual, in that Lipsky had been diving alone, and no one knew how far into the hole he had actually made it. The only way to find out was to conduct a thorough search. Lipsky's body was eventually found at 115 meters below the surface, nearly 3 times the depth considered safe for recreational divers. But Lipsky was no amateur. The 22-year-old was in fact a diving instructor. So why, millions soon wondered, did the video captured by his camera show him descending at a rapid rate towards his own demise? The roughly 7-minute video went on to make Lipsky's death one of the most famous in diving history. It was as disturbing as it was mysterious. Tarek Omar would later offer the theory that Lipsky was weighed down and that his camera may have tipped the scales. However, this explanation alone hasn't been enough to stop the internet from proliferating various theories about the nature of this strange and horrifying accident. Overlooked amid much of the hysteria is the fact that Lipsky's death is part of a larger phenomena, and the phenomena did not stop with Lipsky. A few years after Yuri Lipsky's death received international attention, a 24-year-old diver from England named James Smith went missing at the Blue Hole. The story initially followed what seemed to be emerging as a pattern. He entered the water, and somewhere between there and the opening 250 meters away, he simply vanished. However, one thing that makes Smith's death particularly haunting is that, despite the fact he was known to die in a very specific location, namely the Blue Hole, his body has never been found. The rest of us can only assume he's still buried somewhere deep beneath the surface of the Red Sea, swallowed forever by the alluring spirit of Shaheen. Visitors to the Blue Hole today will see James Smith's name alongside many others. But there's another name that might make you do a double take. Karl Marx. It's not the author of the Communist Manifesto. It is, in fact, a 45-year-old German diver who had a fatal accident on January 10, 2007 at the Blue Hole of Dahab. A year after Marx, Swiss diver Stefan Felder suffered a similar fate, descending confidently and peacefully into the calm coastal waters of the Red Sea. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, he was nowhere to be found. In recent years, the deaths have not shown any signs of stopping either. In fact, in 2017, international interest was reignited in the remote diving site after a dramatic incident involving multiple pro divers. World record-setting freediver Alicia Zecchini traveled to the Blue Hole in July of 2017. Not only was Zecchini planning to dive at the deadly site, but she would in fact be attempting something that perhaps no person had ever attempted before. She would be trying to cross the Blue Hole's famous archway with just a single breath. Accompanying Zecchini was Irish safety diver Stephen Keenan. Keenan was described by Outsider magazine as, quote, "freediving's most accomplished and beloved safety diver." Surely, if anyone could pass through the deadly Blue Hole and live to tell the tale, it would be the sport's most accomplished and beloved safety diver, right? At about 160 feet below the surface, Alicia Zecchini became disoriented. Automatically, Keenan dove down to meet her. As he swam towards the surface carrying Zecchini, Zecchini was eventually able to regain her bearings and swim to safety. But when she got there, Keenan was nowhere to be found. It was later determined that Keenan had blacked out. It is unknown to this day the depth at which Keenan lost consciousness. He was found floating on the surface nearby, face down, motionless. Keenan's death sent shockwaves through the international diving community, providing even more evidence that the forces at work in Dahab were truly something above and beyond the ordinary in an already extraordinary sport. Alright, we've now looked at just 9 of the potentially 200 plus fatal accidents that have occurred at the Blue Hole. Frankly, most of what we learn from these stories is that whatever forces are at work, they're swift and they're powerful. Divers seem to just disappear in the blink of an eye. Seasoned professionals seem to suddenly lose their grasp of the situation, descending inexplicably, almost as if they're doing it on purpose. As bizarre as the whole thing is, thanks to an international community of diving experts and a growing interest in the site over previous decades, some plausible explanations do exist. We'll go through these one by one, starting with the phenomena known as narcosis. In underwater diving, one of the most important factors for divers to always consider is the inherent risk of breathing out of a gas tank at extreme depth. According to the NIH, quote, "Certain gases at high pressure cause an anesthetic effect that alters a diver's consciousness." This strange condition has also been nicknamed the raptures of the deep. It has even been called the martini effect for the drunken state it seems to put unsuspecting divers in. The mechanics of it are still not completely understood by science, but in short, certain gases with higher lipophilicity cause mental impairment as underwater depth increases. These effects can be felt starting at depths below around 30 feet, and they're usually mild. But once you start descending to extreme depths of several hundred feet or more, the symptoms are downright shocking. Divers breathing at a depth of below 300 feet can experience powerful hallucinations. They can also lose their sense of both time and direction while experiencing dramatic changes in mood, including becoming manic or euphoric. In extreme cases, narcosis itself can even kill you. Divers in the Blue Hole are potentially encountering depths of 400 feet below the surface, meaning they are way beyond even the far threshold for severe narcosis. The connection here between the science and the mythology is hard to ignore. Upon reaching the glowing blue archway, divers may suddenly be overcome by an eerie change in both body and mind. This change is, by all accounts, something like being really drunk, really confused, and suddenly enthusiastic and impulsive. Could this be the sinister lore of the ancient spirit of Shaheen? As chilling as it is to consider, it is quite possible that many of the divers who met their demise here met it by the propulsion of their own flippers. Just ask Sylvie Martin. An experienced diver in her own right, Martin was diving the Blue Hole when, according to her own first-hand account, she began feeling off. At about 200 feet below the surface, she actually began intentionally deflating her buoyancy regulator. Her dive buddy had to swim down, grab her, and pull her up toward the surface before she suddenly came to her senses again. If narcosis can induce borderline suicidal behavior in experienced divers, what can it do to inexperienced divers? The simple reality of the Blue Hole is that it is really, really deep. Much deeper than many diving enthusiasts will ever go in their lifetime. Depth does incredibly dangerous things to your mind. But that's not all that depth does. Another deadly obstacle imposed by the Blue Hole's extreme depth is the sheer challenge of breathing itself. Not only do you run the risk of crazy hallucinations and deranged behavior thanks to narcosis, but you also run the risk of simply running out of air. The reason for this is simple, but easy to overlook or underestimate. The further you descend underwater, and the more water pressure increases, the more oxygen you need. This need increases at an alarmingly fast rate. Atmospheric pressure doubles every 10 meters. So, roughly speaking, every 10 meters you descend, your body requires double the amount of oxygen. When you are hundreds of feet below the surface, the amount of air you need to breathe is many, many times more than what you would normally need on land. Bringing enough air to make it all the way through the depths of the Blue Hole is a genuine logistical challenge. Even if you bring all the necessary equipment with you, which will surely include several tanks with different gas mixes which you can easily cycle through, you can't hang out down there for long. On the other hand, if you don't bring enough air in the first place, you're obviously in big trouble from the moment you start the dive. To be so catastrophically underprepared would seem like a rookie mistake. But there is ample reason to think that even experienced divers can seriously miscalculate at this particular site. For example, Yuri Lipsky, a diving instructor, reportedly entered the blue hole with only one tank strapped to his back. Even those who are familiar with the fact you need more oxygen for lower depths can still underestimate just how much they need for depths as extreme as this. So in short, we can add unexpectedly running out of air to the list of possible explanations, in addition to losing your mental faculties due to narcosis. But there's still more going on here. It's hard enough already to navigate an underwater dive site with a narcosis-drunken brain and no air in your lungs. But try doing it while also being so deep underwater that you can't even figure out which direction is the surface and which direction is the bottom of the ocean. Now, this sounds almost impossible because it's so far removed from our intuitions about the physical world, but in such a foreign, extreme environment, basic senses we normally rely on start to break down. According to the National Ocean Service, it is rare that sunlight ever reaches further than 200 meters below the surface of the ocean. Divers in the blue hole are potentially swimming well over halfway toward the point where their surroundings would become as black as empty outer space, where photosynthesis is impossible, and where, soon enough, David Attenborough would start pointing out shrimp that glow in the dark and fish with light bulbs dangling in front of their faces. Divers in the blue hole never quite reach this point of total blackness, but keep in mind, they are also wearing masks and heavy diving equipment, and they are swimming through dramatic underwater landscapes that block out what little light there is even further. The ominously intriguing blue glow of the archway is made so in large part by the fact that it dominates the spectrum of visible light at that depth. Now, divers will inevitably carry flashlights, but while these are lifesavers when it comes to one's immediate surroundings, they don't provide much help when it comes to the larger picture. Floating through deep, open waters with little to no ability to see the surface means you might decide it's time to bail, and yet realize with shock that you don't know which way to go. This, too, might explain why so many divers who enter the blue hole fail to resurface. There is one last factor worth considering when it comes to the blue hole, or rather, the Red Sea in general. The Red Sea is a unique body of water for two reasons. One, it is home to an unusually vast array of marine life, both fish and plant, many of which can only be found there and nowhere else. And two, it is largely unexplored. Couple this with the fact that many of the blue hole's victims, including even some of the ones we looked at today, have never been found, and it does paint an interesting picture. Of course, let's be clear, this is highly speculative, but it does seem possible, given the amount of unique marine life and how little we still know about what lies beneath the Red Sea, that chance encounters with hostile organisms could perhaps explain some of these disappearances too. After all, where else are unsuspecting divers plunging freely into extreme depths of this particular body of water on a regular basis? The Red Sea has plenty of other popular diving sites, but none so extreme, so deep, so full of shadows. There is something distinctly human about underwater diving. It represents one of our most innate traits in its purest form, the primal impulse to venture into the unknown. It is hard to imagine a world more alien than the world awaiting those who swim the blue hole of Dahab, and yet it sits freely accessible just meters away from the bars and beach towels that line the South Egyptian shore. But this alien world also inflicts strange, rapid infirmities upon our land-dwelling human bodies. It sucks the air from our lungs, even when we thought we brought enough air with us. It confounds our special awareness, temporarily erasing physical realities as fundamental as the sky above and the ground below. Perhaps most frightening of all, it corrupts our minds, making us think and do things that only moments ago we would have never imagined. Contrary to what many might believe, however, safely diving the Blue Hole of Dahab is, in fact, possible. Highly experienced, technically proficient divers can and do take all the necessary precautions and swim through this marvelous natural wonder on a regular basis. But sadly, even to this day, they constitute a mere percentage of the total number of divers who make the voyage out to this mystical and remote site. Until the international diving community wakes up to the truly incredible risks associated with the Blue Hole and begins heeding the warnings and advice of local experts like Tarek Omar, the Blue Hole of Dahab will continue to cast its alluring spell over unsuspecting divers, reeling them in with its magical glow, then snatching them out of existence before anyone has time to save them. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Tell us, what do you think is the most likely explanation for the huge amounts of deaths at the Blue Hole of Dahab? Would you ever consider visiting the site yourself? Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content like this in the near future. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.